Well, meanwhile, President Trump is firing back at North Korean dictator Kim Jong Un. The president took to Twitter this morning, writing, quote, Kim Jong Un of North Korea, who is obviously a madman who doesn't mind starving or killing his people, will be tested like never before.
And that came after the rogue regime said it may test a hydrogen bomb over the Pacific Ocean. And in a rare personal statement overnight, Kim Jong Un slammed what he called the, quote, mentally deranged behavior of Mr. Trump.
Kim spoke out after President Trump announced new sanctions punishing foreign companies that do business with North Korea. Here's what Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin had to say about those sanctions yesterday.
Foreign financial institutions are now on notice that going forward, they can choose to do business with the United States or with North Korea, but not both.
John Hughes is a former State Department official. He was Deputy Director of the Office of Sanctions Policy and Implementation, and he joins us now from Washington. So, John, break down these new sanctions for us. Why might these measures work where others in the past have failed?
Well, certainly this is a very significant step, and it's unclear whether they'll work, but what they do is they put sanctions architecture into place. So what they do is put on what are called so-called secondary sanctions. Now, these have never been used before other than in the case of Iran. And what they do, as Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said, is they give foreign banks a choice. They can either do business with North Korea or they can do business with the United States. This is potentially significant. Now, it's important to note that this doesn't actually sanction any companies at the moment. But what it does do is that it gives the U.S. government the ability to sanction companies, and it cuts them off from the U.S. financial system, which is very significant.
You mentioned Iran, and if anything was clear at this UN General Assembly, John, is that President Trump has set up confrontations with both North Korea and Iran on nuclear issues. The president is threatening to decertify the Iran nuclear deal, and former Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, who, as you know, helped negotiate that deal, told the New York Times recently, quote, if the president pulls back on the Iran deal, given Iranian compliance, it will make diplomacy with North Korea almost impossible because U.S. credibility will be shot, end quote. John, do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, I agree with that. I mean, this puts U.S. credibility on the line. I mean, the Iran nuclear deal is not just a deal between the United States and Iran. It's a deal by the entire international community, including by the UN. And for the U.S. to threaten to pull back from it, it does question whether we're committed to other things around the world, including North Korea.
So, John, let me ask you about this. When we look at the back and forth with North Korea, I mean, Kim Jong Un's response to Trump's UN speech was a threat to test another hydrogen bomb, but this time over the Pacific. What does that response tell you about how he views these sanctions and whether or not the words that have been flung about on Twitter and through statements are actually working?
Well, this is certainly a war of words, and this has been going on for a long time, predating this administration, and Kim Jong Un has not shown any inclinations to want to pull back his program. And it's unclear to me whether the threat of these new sanctions are going to work. And more importantly, in my mind, is, as I said, these sanctions put architecture in place to impose new sanctions. They don't actually impose new sanctions on any banks. So the question is the U.S. government willing to actually impose sanctions under the new regime and specifically sanction significant Chinese banks? And it's unclear to me whether they're willing to do that. And more importantly, if they do that, what is the end game here? What are they looking to drive towards?
Well, that gets to my next point, John. Yesterday, Ambassador Nikki Haley said that the point of the latest sanctions, which, as you've pointed out, give the Treasury more authority to sanction businesses and financial institutions that do business with North Korea, at least theoretically. The point, Nikki Haley said, was to slow production of their nuclear program. She didn't say anything about negotiations or talks. Do you think the Trump administration even wants to negotiate?
It's unclear to me whether they do. I mean, I think that they're still searching for a policy. I think that they see sanctions as a logical step here, and hopefully they can increase some pressure. But, the Kim administration has for a long time procured materials from around the world using lots of different networks. It's unclear to me whether this is going to stop that from happening, but certainly it's a good step. But again, the question is, what is the goal here? And I think the Trump administration needs to clearly lay that out.
You know, there's an interesting article by David Ignatius in the Washington Post today, and all along the narrative out of the Trump administration and maybe from the media as well has been this binary option, either fire and fury or sanctions and, strangulation of the economy. And Ignatius suggested that there are more creative ways to go about this. Do you see that at all, or is this a binary situation where either we're going to continue to see whether sanctions play out, North Korea will continue to test its missiles and now hydrogen bombs, or we will see a military confrontation of some sort?
Except that Steve Bannon, the president's former advisor, seemed to have given away the idea of using the military to stop North Korea, because he said that there are no options when it comes to using military force.
Listen, I think you raise a very good point, and it's, this is not a binary choice. I think it's, everyone needs to remember that sanctions are not a panacea here. Sanctions need to be part of an overall policy. If you look at the case of Iran, the reason why sanctions were so effective is that there was an entire global community committed behind them,
right,
and is also part of a much broader effort towards Iran. In this case, for people to think that if all you do is more sanctions, that you're somehow going to achieve a goal, I think it's unrealistic.
Former U.S. State Department official John Hughes, thank you so much, sir, for your analysis. We appreciate it.
Thank you.